FieldWatch leads the world in online brand protection and compliance monitoring. It scrubs the entire internet looking for any content that could harm your company in order to bring it to your attention for immediate action and remediation. With our powerful platform, your team can immediately address any violations in order to get ahead of regulators and avoid brand risks. To learn more about FieldWatch, log on to fieldwatch.ai and schedule a demo with our team today. Hi everyone, and welcome to Risk Radio, a FieldWatch original podcast featuring one-on-one discussions with key players in multiple industries dealing with risk, compliance, and brand challenges.
Hi everyone, thanks for listening in. We have an exciting show for you today, but first I wanted to reintroduce the podcast as we have rebranded to better encompass our mission of compliance embracement. I'm happy to announce we are now Risk Radio. I'm Jerilyn Taylor Passey, and I'll be your guide as we explore the people, trends, and ideas shaping the future of direct selling. With us today, we are so excited to have Katie Haas. She is the Director of Consumer Protection in Utah. I had the amazing opportunity to hear her speak at the Utah Coalition of Direct Selling a few months ago, and we needed her on the show. So hi, Katie. Thanks so much for being here.
Hi, Jerilyn. Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about your role as the Director of Consumer Protection?
Yeah, so in the state of Utah, the Division of Consumer Protection is one of several divisions in the Department of Commerce, which is under the governor. We are the primary enforcer of our state's UDAP statute. That's the Unfair and Deceptive Acts and Practices statute that has what is in Utah, our Consumer Sales Practices Act. And that is the primary statute in which we enforce against deceptive acts and practices in consumer transactions. We have an administrative law function, but we can also, in collaboration with the Attorney General's office, who represents our agency, bring cases in district court and sometimes federal court, depending on the nature of the case.
Yeah, quite extensive there. So a lot of things out of direct selling. I did see a video of you the other day. I don't know how long ago it was, but it was about car salesman scams. So you have quite the array of experience. And super thrilled to share your insights. I'll try not to rapid fire these questions in my excitement, but we do have several questions from our listeners I'll try to get through. So let's go ahead and jump in. First, let's talk a little bit about enforcement trends. What are you seeing the most often right now in direct selling space?
What I'm seeing the most often in direct selling space, and I don't think it's changed much, but maybe the crackdown on it feels a little bit more intense. But what we're seeing is a lot of things about earnings statements, and of course what I would call like the quality or the features of the products being sold. So oftentimes it's medicinal purposes if we're talking about things like essential oils or vitamins or other things like that. But really the bigger concern oftentimes is the financial harms that come with overpromising on what people might be able to earn if they decide to engage in a direct selling practice.
Absolutely. So how have enforcement priorities shifted over the last 12 to 18 months? I know you mentioned right now it's the climate's very political and lots of things are changing. So has anything with enforcement changed along those regulations?
I don't think the enforcement field has changed that much or that drastically. I think post AMG, we see a little bit of a shift in the FTC. And what I think people are missing is that the FTC is actually doing a lot more to collaborate with states right now to bring joint enforcement actions. And that's across the board in many different industries, including the direct selling industry. We brought a couple cases here in Utah that were not direct selling, but were coaching how to flip real estate. We're going to teach you to be your own boss in that kind of way. And they overpromised on what they were delivering to people as far as that coaching and mentoring if you wanted to get into the practice of flipping homes. And so we teamed up with the FTC and FTC versus Zurich and FTC versus Nudge. We were a state partner in that to bring those actions against some companies that were operating out of Utah in that space. What was helpful for the state is we also then, through that collaboration, learned a lot of things. And now we're feeling a little bit more emboldened in bringing some of those bigger cases ourselves. And so it's been really nice to have the FTC from the state enforcement side. It's been really nice to have that collaboration working together because the FTC is reaching out more and more to states to partner with them on some of these bigger cases. It allows for a lot of sharing of the load, but also a lot of our state UDAP statutes have some significant fines and penalties attached to them. And that has been helpful in bringing companies into compliance.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's great to know they're not just targeting our industry and social selling here, but yeah, this across the board. So what are you seeing for typical triggers on a regulatory investigation? Like what's a red flag?
So red flags for us that we see are, again, if I'm seeing, this is classic, and many of you already know this, but if I'm seeing social media posts with a lot of luxury, showing off your earnings, saying it was easy, no work involved, and do all of these other things to show that I'm doing incredibly well through this, what started as a little bit of me just recommending products to my friends, that those over promises that aren't truly substantiated, maybe that person had the good fortune of getting there, but it is not the typical result for most people. Those are triggers. We usually start seeing those ads. We're complaint driven oftentimes at the division. So somebody comes and complains to us and says, hey, I didn't feel like I got what I was promised. And that kind of triggers a snowball.
Wow.
But oftentimes it's the quality and grade of the product. So you say that these are the best knives in the world, or this essential oil is purely grown out of the country and is sourced from these perfect places, and then we find out it's not. That can trigger the investigation, and then what ends up happening is those investigations can take on a life of their own, because once an enforcement agency's in, they want to wrap up all possible things in that. So they're going to start looking at the other things that are typical concerns. And for the direct selling space, always those earning claims and the compensation plans are something that we're curious about and want to know more about. And so a complaint can trigger that opening. And that's oftentimes what happens. We can also just see things online ourselves and go, well, that's weird, and then decide we want to go in.
Yeah, it's actually very easy to find.
Yeah, they are. You're talking about an industry that for the most part is reliant on 1099 independent contractors. Many of them are not in your office day to day, understanding the bigger picture, understanding the concerns. They might not even know what the FTC stands for. So they hear, don't do these things, but then they see a lot of other people out there, maybe even people they're competing against, marketing themselves in a certain way. And so it's natural that they want to mimic what they see other people do that's successful. And so they start doing it. And that's why it's so important for companies to have compliance programs, but to then actually enforce those compliance programs. It is not enough just to say, look, on paper, we've got this compliance program. That's great. If you flagged 100 posts, but then took down none of them, those are static.
What do you do? What's the follow-up, right?
Exactly. And so that follow through to really enforce your policies. And one of the things we're going to look at too is, are you enforcing your policies the same with the person who just started to the person who's been there for quite some time and is successful? And I get that sometimes it's difficult, actually more difficult, to go against the people who've been really successful in your business. But it is really important because they model the behavior that you expect everybody else to follow. And so we look at that.
Absolutely.
And those are things we start to really dive into when we're starting to investigate a case.
You're absolutely right. A lot of companies tend to be very biased for their top distributors because you don't want to, shake any cages, but it's very important to maintain a full stream of compliance across the board. And I think it really starts with education. So from the very beginning, and something we've noticed is having an educational platform and being proactive with it instead of reactive has been really great for spreading awareness across the board and letting people know we're here to help you as we're compliance, we don't want to be the bad guys. We want to be the good guys. So from your perspective, what does a strong, well-run compliance program look like?
Well, and I want to be fair. Utah, we have a lot of direct sellers in Utah. And there's a lot of startup ones. And it's really hard, I think, in the beginning when you're just a CEO with maybe a team of 2 or 3 other people to be already thinking about compliance. So it is really important, even in the beginning, that you start thinking about compliance, because sometimes some of those practices get set in. And then when you go to crack down on your distributors, it becomes really difficult because they've grown using the methods that they've used, which are arguably deceptive. So you really want to be careful in the very beginning, even if it's just you as the one man shop or one woman shop, that you are making sure that you're modeling the right behavior for your distributors and really working with them to understand what's good and what's bad. And then I don't think I directly answered the question that you just asked. So if you want to ask it again, what does a good education program look like? As you grow, I think it's important that your newsletters contain something about compliance, that your compliance team is respected, and that you back your compliance team when they reach out to your distributors, that they take it seriously, that there's follow-up education and follow-up monitoring maybe of those distributors who've made mistakes. I also think it's really important to give good examples versus bad examples. Most people who come into the direct selling space to do this as a side business maybe do not have a marketing background. So again, they're going to take what's already out there that they can see out there and try to mimic it. So if you give the examples, if you say, here's an example of a post that's done well, that we would feel like is compliant, here are some glaring examples of things not to do, I do think it is really helpful for them to have the visual, exact statements that are forbidden, exact statements that are okay. Those types of things that your lawyers and your compliance team can really vet really help people who are just starting out make sure that they're building from a framework of good practices rather than modeling the wrong ones.
Absolutely. That's one of the reasons we at FieldWatch work with startups, is because we understand that it's important to create the foundation there and just grow. We want to grow with your company and make sure you're starting off. A lot of, when you do speak to startups, they have a budget for this or that, when they don't even think about compliance. And we stress to them how important it is, because a lot of startup companies, if they do get fined right off the bat, they're small, they're, small companies, so that might put them out of business. So it's just very important for them to understand and having that awareness. And I think another important factor with that is not just sending out notices, like you said, having the newsletter, not just sending out notices when people are not in compliance, but just keeping compliance as part of their everyday life and part of their everyday sales tactics and part of their everyday social media postings. That way it's not like, we're the bad guys coming in to break you down. No, we're here to partner with you, and we want you to be safe as well.
And one thing I would also caution and remind about is a lot of the social media things now have like private groups. So as distributors grow and they start these kind of private things where they think they can be a little bit more free in what they're saying. I also have a team of really good investigators and who can get into those things and figure out how to crack in and find stuff. So you just want to be really mindful that private is not private. You might think you're avoiding the regulators, but we have subpoena power. We can get those posts from Facebook and other social media platforms. It's not enough just to say, well, I'm having this in a closed meeting, or it's only to my team. Those are still deceptive when you are overpromising to even people in your teams. And so you just need to be really mindful that you have to be above board in all things, and private rooms don't count or aren't free from the eyes of regulators.
Right. You're absolutely right. And I think a lot of people in companies and just don't know that. And they think, well, this is private. They're not going to see it. We'll stay off the radar. And that is just not true. So I'm so glad you brought that up and mentioned it, because there's so many examples out there where we've had to flag it and they didn't understand how we got in. And if we can get in, of course, the legal and regulator, you guys can get in. So that's really good to know. Thank you for sharing that. Looking ahead, where do you see regulatory enforcement heading in the next few years?
I think there's more and more focus on the earnings claims and what true income disclosure statements should look like. Obviously, our federal partner, the FTC, is heavily engaged in that, in rulemaking and other things. I'd be really watching that. I would try to get ahead of that. And so when you're saying, look, I made $1,000 in selling this product, I don't want to name a product because I'm not trying to call out any industry members right now. So I made $1,000 selling this widget last month. Well, if the party I threw cost me $600, if my Facebook marketing account cost me another $300, if it cost me $100 to do, something else related to buy the product to then resell the product, if you're not doing a straight to consumer, to have enough at my party so that I could resell it, and I didn't make that money. And then I'm telling everybody I made $1,000, but really it cost me $1,000 to make that $1,000. Is that really making $1,000? I don't think most businesses would say I made profits of $1,000 when they had to spend $1,000 to make that $1,000. And so it can feel really good when you're finally breaking even, or even when you make some sales, and maybe you don't mind the expense of the party because you had all your friends over and it was a great time and it was an awesome opportunity just to get together with people. I get it. But if you're deducting that as a business expense, as a 1099, if you're tracking those things and you didn't really make that, well, the company doesn't necessarily know that. But as regulators, we're starting to really look at that, because when we are telling people this is what you could make, they actually have to be able to make that free from after most of the normal things that a business would consider the business costs of doing that. And
outside of the 1% who's actually making that, right? So
yeah, I mean, look, there are people who are very successful in this. I have many products in my office and in my home that come from direct selling companies. There are lots of wonderful, good products out there that this industry provides. And I have a lot of friends and who are in this space who fell in love with a vitamin, and it really did impact them in a way that they were like, I want to be sharing this with all of my friends, and and then ended up making money sharing it with all their friends because they love those products. I think that's fine. I think that people should be rewarded for recommending products that they love. I have the people in my life who I don't want to do all the research into this. So when I'm like, man, I really feel like my vitamin D is down, I have my friend who I call and I'm like, I need a vitamin D supplement. Which one are you recommending today? Like, what is your favorite? And we all have those people in our lives, the car expert, the technology expert, whatever it is that we call and we rely on. It's great that there's an industry out there that gives remuneration to the people who actually take the time to do the research and pick the products. I think you're seeing that more and more in social media too, with influencers starting to do that. And I think you're seeing hybrids in the direct selling space there too. Again, be really careful with that. But so I think that concept is fine. It's just the over promising. And when people have to buy in quite a bit in order to make that money, the large startup costs in purchasing things is, I think, where we as regulators start to get inventory. Absolutely. We start to get concerned, and states independently step in or in some sort of collaboration. And so keep in mind, you have a couple different things that can happen. A state could come in by themselves. A state could team up with other states in what we call multi-state. And then you could have FTC by themselves or FTC joining up with states. There's a lot of regulators out there. And we always get the complaint of, why us? Well, you fell on the radar. And usually you fell on the radar because it's something that one of your distributors said. It's not a radar you want to be on. So it's really important that you're making sure your distributors are not out there saying things that they shouldn't be saying. And I think in some cases, distributors at the top levels have started to be held accountable for their statements as well. And we're seeing that. And that is really important to keep in mind too, that back to the good modeled behavior of the top level people, they really need to make sure that they're in compliance, because I think more and more state and federal regulators are going to start going after them as well, because they knew better.
I've been hearing about a few cases like that. So keeping the top distributors accountable for their whole downline has been super important right now. I don't know if I don't want to talk about any of the cases, but you probably know a few. So what do they do? So if you do have a distributor who posts on social media and they're trying to follow all the rules and they are putting disclaimers like they think they're supposed to, do those actually work? Do the disclaimers count for anything?
In my personal opinion, not much.
Okay.
How many of us have bought a weight loss program because we saw the picture of the friend who's now lost all the weight, and then, to be honest, and then there's the results aren't typical at the bottom, and so
fine print,
fine print at the bottom, very tiny little letters that say results are not typical. So no, we can put all the disclaimers we want out there, but when you're bombarded with image after image of success, of health, well-being, success, monetary riches, ease, comfort, luxury, all of those types of things, the little disclaimer at the bottom, I feel like I'm in the Dumb and Dumber show where he's like, so you're saying I have a chance. It's not, I mean, this is where we're at. And so I don't think, and I think most of us today, we're bombarded with so many terms and conditions, disclaimers, long contracts, that candidly, most people are responsible for what they sign, but they are clicking through and they just don't have the impact of the images. A picture says 1,000 words. So if you want to put a picture of somebody up there who's bankrupt and on the streets because they gave away all of their money to buy inventory, and say this is also a result, but you're not doing that. You're putting up the people who've been incredibly successful at this endeavor or want to at least show that they've been successful, even if they haven't. And those little disclaimers are just not doing the trick. And so if you are saying one thing in the picture and the image and everything else, and then the fine print at the bottom is the other, it's just not on balance, it's still deceptive.
That is very good to know. I think a lot of companies have been relying too heavily on that. So thank you for notating that. And now we know. Could you give us maybe the top 2 things you would say companies should be doing to prepare for what's coming next in the upcoming regulation rules?
I would start thinking about those income disclosure statements and what an accurate one looks like. I think if the industry as a whole could get to something that regulators would feel comfortable with, that would be great. There's an argument about whether or not those are even really that effective. And that's like a whole nother podcast to discuss that. But I think if they're going to be allowable and you're going to do them, then what a true statement looks like. Things that you would consider business expenses, things that you wouldn't.
Yeah.
How do you, maybe an average of what the typical person has to spend? I don't know. You have to start thinking through that now, because I know with industry and with your distributors, I do get the business side of it, that you do not want to scare them all immediately with a lot of heavy regulation and a lot of changes and all of that. So if you're going to have to change your compensation plan at all to get into compliance, if you are going to have to retool those income disclosures, if you're going to have to start tracking the business expenses, thinking ahead now to what that might look like for your style of company, I think is a really great way to get ahead. The other thing that I want to touch on in the few minutes that we have left is sometimes when these inquiries come in from regulators, they are not taken very seriously at the beginning. And so it's very important that you figure out which agency or state, federal agency that you're dealing with, figuring out if there's other states or agencies that might be looking at this with them, and to be really responsive and have a good open dialogue with the regulator. If I come in, for example, from us, and I see that this was just 1 or 2 rogue distributors that you had warned them, you've taken them down, you've shut them off maybe even because they just were repeat offenders, we might be in and out very quickly. If it is a slog to get information, if we're seeing more and more problems, if we're seeing you're not even adhering to your own policies, yeah, you've got words on paper, but you're not actually complying it can really go. And so working with the regulator to make sure that you're understanding what they're asking for, those meet and confers on, what you get a big subpoena. Okay, what is it you're really looking for? Help us understand what you're seeing. Many state regulators are looking just to get the information that they need in not necessarily an acrimonious way. And one of our fine factors is how well you worked with us and to resolve the problem. And so we tend to start reducing our fines and penalties in our book if we feel like the company really kind of got what we were concerned about and quickly helped us come to a resolution. And so it's just something to think about, is to make sure that your entire team, because sometimes the letters go to the wrong people first, that they are not just put on a desk someplace and ignored, because they are important when they come in, especially if you're a small company and you're not familiar with the process.
Absolutely. Those are great points. Thank you so much for sharing that, because sometimes it's hard to know where to start. Whether you're a startup or a bigger enterprise company and you have to go back and rewrite your whole compensation plan, that's just something you have to do to stay above regulatory radar. So Those are really great points. And before we wrap this up, are there any recommendations you have to direct sales companies who might be struggling to find compliance experts?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's compliance experts out there, but I can understand that that's a cost that maybe you are not ready to bear. That said, I would be looking very carefully at some of the settlement agreements that the FTC has entered into or other state partners with direct selling companies, and those terms in there and the things that they have prohibited versus the things that they allow. I would be looking at some of the free things that some of the compliance experts out there have offered, any kind of guidances that you can find, just so that you get your team on the right foot. Because once your team has a way of doing things, it is very hard to get them to shift and it causes a lot of pain. And so, but I also, to the extent that it's affordable, getting a compliance team in early, whether it's internal or external, is really important, because it is prolific what can happen and fast on social media. And oftentimes, once those posts are up, it is very hard for people to take them down. And so if you see something that is troublesome to you, make sure that your people, the distributors that did it, are taking it down, and that you have a takedown notice for them to take it down. If they don't take it down, trying to work with a social media company to take it down, and take it down across the platforms that they might be on.
Oh, this has been so amazing. I'm so thankful that you were able to take your time today. I know your time is very precious, so thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. And for all the listeners out there, thanks for tuning in to the new Risk Radio. And don't forget to like, follow, and share.
And that's all we have for you today. Thanks for listening to Risk Radio, a FieldWatch original podcast. If you enjoyed these conversations, be sure to keep up to date with FieldWatch at fieldwatch.ai and be on the lookout for our next Risk Radio episode wherever you listen to podcasts.